You are indeed watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back if you've been watching the Freedom Side, and welcome for the first time if this is your first time seeing us. Very happy to have you with us on this Thursday, the 4th of February. We've got a fantastic show, as we do for you every single week here, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern. We've got Rosa Clemente on the show today. We've got Abby Martin on the show today. We've got our friend Larry Stafford coming on the show today to give us some important updates about things happening in the struggle against criminal injustice. We're going to be talking about the ridiculousness of the Democratic Party and really all of our political elites in terms of getting people real help, real aid, real support, and much, much more here. It's going to be a great show. So as we always do, take this time now, and please, if you could, share this feed. Wherever you're watching it, share it, whether it be YouTube, whether it be Twitter, whether it be Facebook, so that the people who are following you can follow us. So just give you 1 second here, hit that share button, let everybody know. I don't know, text someone if you want, let them know we're about to start. Anything. We want all of you to be here to see and hear from our great guests this evening. But before we get into the rest of our show and all the guests and everything we're going to be talking about, we want to turn to what I think is one of the most important issues happening in this country right now, and that's the struggle over how much and when, in terms of aid, is going to be sent to the tens of millions of struggling people in this country. Well, as we start the show here today, the House of Representatives has voted to strip Marjorie Taylor Greene, a congresswoman from Georgia, of all of her committee assignments. Congresswoman Greene was become well known, infamous you might say, in about the past week or so for numerous racist, anti-Semitic, and pro-QAnon statements, as well as statements claiming that she wanted to assassinate elements of the leadership of the Democratic Party, and claiming that the school shootings at Parkland and at Sandy Hook were in fact false flags. She attempted to walk some of that back today, didn't work. Now she has no committee assignments, but that is not what I want to talk about here tonight. What I really want to talk about here tonight is the millions, the tens of millions of people who are suffering in huge ways in this country, and how the political elites, quite frankly, on both sides of the aisle, are not doing anywhere close to enough and not doing it anywhere close to fast enough to bring real relief to people, and it's causing serious pain. Now, I want to read you some top lines here about the suffering that's going on. Just want to look at my notes because I want to get this right for you here. Nearly 24 million adults, that's 11% of the adults in the country, nearly 24 million, reported that their household often did not have enough food in the last week. 24 million people who are suffering from hunger from week to week. There's an estimated 15 million people, adults I should say, that's 1 in 5 adults, who are not caught up on rent. So 15 million people, at least, this is just an estimate, who are behind on rent and falling further behind day after day. And this is really a stunning stat, and one that I hope people really take to heart here. 35% of all adults in the country, that's 80 million people, 35% of all adults in the country are saying that they are struggling to meet all of their basic expenses from week to week. They don't know if their head's going to be above water or underwater week to week. That's 80 million people. Now, it's one thing to hear those numbers, but it's a whole different thing, I think, to see how many of them are represented, especially when you start to dig a little bit deeper into the breakdowns as it concerns families, as it concerns racial backgrounds and things of that nature. So we want to look at a few of these, and these come from the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities, these graphs we want to show that really do, I think, bring this home. The first one we want to bring up regards families with children and the issue of hunger in the home. Nearly 1 in 6 adults with children, their household lacks sufficient food in the last 7 days. So that means, and you can see it there in the graph, 15% of households with children are struggling to eat from week to week, suffering from hunger from week to week. So, I mean, what that really means is you are essentially being penalized for having a family. Now, when you look at the racial breakdowns, you see similar issues in terms of who's really being affected here. And you can see it here, this food insufficiency. So all adults, again, 11% of all adults are struggling to have enough to eat from week to week. 19% of black adults, so 8% more than the national average, 21% of Latino adults. So that's 10% over the national average of Latinos, 8% of black adults who are struggling to find enough food to eat from week to week. And these patterns really recreate themselves in many different ways. We want to show you something. We mentioned the 15 million renters, 1 in 5 who aren't caught up on rent, a graph that speaks to this issue as well. You can see 21%, again, that's 15 million of all adults are not caught up on rent. 36% of black adults, 29% of Latino adults are not caught up on rent, facing serious hardship. Again, that's 15 million people in this country who are struggling to pay their rent. And this is a gut punch, this next one I want to bring up, which speaks to children and families as well. 4 in 10 children in renter households are facing food and or housing hardship. You look at that, 46% are facing either of those. So that means 46% of children in this country are living in a house where either they didn't get enough to eat every week or that they don't know if they're going to have a roof over their head come the next week. 46% of children in this country, the richest country in the history of countries, 46% of children don't know where their next meal is coming from or whether they're going to be living on the street in a week. And we want to bring up another one that speaks to this same issue, similar issue of people paying with their expenses, the usual household expenses, that shows you some of the same breakdowns of different communities. 35% of all adults here, but 51% of black and Latino adults, 51% of black and Latino adults in this country are saying that it's somewhat or very difficult for their household to pay the usual expenses. A simple majority, over 50% of black and Latino adults in this country are struggling week to week to pay their basic expenses. And one final one we want to show you here, which I think speaks very heavily to all of the previous graphs we saw, is about the breakdown of who lost jobs in the pandemic and what income categories lost the most employment here. So we want to bring this up, which shows you very clearly, you can see just clear cut, that low wage work, that's where there were the largest job losses anywhere, is low wage workers. Now we know that low wage workers are often disproportionately black and Latino, so it makes some of those other numbers make sense. Now, of course, the Democrats were saying towards the end of last year and the beginning part of this year, very beginning part of this year, well, just get us in there. Make sure you go vote in Georgia, or you help them get out the vote, or do something, because if we win in Georgia, the help is on the way. We're going to start doing things, starting with paying you money. So just for those who maybe somehow forgot the rhetoric that was all over this country and being pushed to us by the Democrats about what they would do when they were in the position they are in now, we have a bit of a reminder for you.
If you send John and the Reverend to Washington, those $2,000 checks will go out the door.
We will be able to pass $2,000 stimulus checks for the people next week.
We'll deliver the $2,000 stimulus checks.
And that begins with the $2,000 stimulus.
When you send me and Reverend Warnock to the Senate, we will pass those $2,000 stimulus checks. You send me and Reverend Warnock to the Senate, we will pass those $2,000 stimulus checks.
They will make decisions about whether we give people a $2,000 check.
We need to pass $2,000 stimulus checks for the people.
For getting people that $2,000 in relief, direct payment.
Congress should pass $2,000 checks. President-elect Biden and Democrats are all pushing for $2,000 relief checks.
$2,000 stimulus checks.
$2,000 relief checks. $2,000 relief checks. They should send $2,000 checks to the American people right now.
Supporting $2,000 relief payments right now.
We need to be passing the $2,000 stimulus relief check.
Now that was the Democrats then. We've got a recent video from White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki about where the Democrats are now.
Go ahead, Simon. I have a couple questions. Thanks, Jen. So during the Georgia runoffs, President Biden campaigned specifically on $2,000 stimulus checks. And obviously, as we've discussed, the payment is $1,400. There doesn't seem to be an active discussion on actually raising that amount. So is that a broken promise to voters who may have been expecting $2,000 checks if Democrats won? And would the administration be open to raising that amount?
Well, you're right that the president is very focused on ensuring millions of Americans receive those checks and that pivotal relief at this point in time. There was $600 payments, as you know, in the $900 billion package that passed in December. This is $1,400. Together, that's $2,000. So it would be delivering on the promise he made, and it's something that he is firmly sticking by.
I mean, talk about splitting hairs there. Obviously, they've broken a promise, and they're just doing whatever they can to try to find some way to make you think that they didn't break a very clear promise, as you saw. But there's one other element of the whole thing. They haven't even given you the $1,400 checks. Many people still haven't gotten the $600 check. So in addition to lying to you about it, they're in there. They've been in there for a number of weeks, and they failed to deliver even on the live version of the promise that they made you. And it really brings two more issues into focus from my point of view. Now, one, of course, is the package itself and whether or not it's even enough, but another one is the process. Now, as for the first one, there's a lot that's out there in terms of what it would take to, quote unquote, get the economy back on its feet, to revive things. $3 trillion, $4 trillion, those are the most credible numbers that are out there. Now, this package from the Biden administration, it's $1.9 trillion, which is not $3 trillion, it's not $4 trillion, it's certainly significantly less. It's also less than the CARES Act of last year. So you can see just right off the bat that the scale of the package does not meet the scale of the problem. Now, maybe another way to put that in terms that are a little easier to understand, one of the big elements of the package is aid to states and localities to help them fill the holes in their budget that have come from the pandemic. But when you look at the amount of money that they're sending to, or at least allegedly say they're going to send to these states and localities, it's about $100 billion less than what they need, which means that even if they pass this, many of these states and localities will still engage in mass layoffs of public sector workers and deep, sharp cuts to many social programs. So again, the scale of the package doesn't meet the scale of the problem. But beyond just that fact alone, there's also the issue of process here. Why have they not done anything yet? Now, everything that you're hearing in the news, well, they're negotiating. The Democrats do not need to negotiate. They have the votes. They have the majority. Now, some of you out there are saying, well, what about, what's that guy's name? Joe Manchin from West Virginia, right? He's in the way. Some of these centrist Democrats are in the way. Let's talk about the process here. The only reason any of these Senate Democrats have power is because the Democrats are in a majority. The only reason they're on the committees that they want to be on is because the leadership, in this case Chuck Schumer, put them there. No one is more influential with the big donors than the House and Senate leadership combined with the White House. So you're telling me you got the president, the leader of both houses of Congress, and quite frankly, the vast majority of the people in the country who were saying that this kind of bill or something to this scale or greater should be voted on right away. People can't wait. They're struggling to eat and they can't find a way to push this thing through. It's absurd. If it wasn't so serious, it would be laughable. They absolutely can do this. But instead, what are they doing? They've constructed this entire kabuki theater. It's all about unity, uniting, reaching across the aisle, working with Republicans. They're even willing to entertain watering down the bill, means testing the fake $2,000 checks, whatever they can do to make it appear as if they did something bad to human beings in order to make sure that some Republicans would vote for the bill and that they would have all the centrist Democrats feeling like, oh yes, we had some impact. But remember, it's all theater. They could muscle this thing through if they wanted to and actually send some level of real help, even if it's not enough to people who exist in this country. But instead, they have chosen to waste weeks of time where they could have been helping children who are struggling to eat. They've wasted weeks of time with a completely fake, just theater exhibition of so-called unity and so-called democracy, because that's what it's really all about, creating the appearance in the wake of January 6th that American democracy is strong, that it's united, that there aren't inherent divisions in America that will take down the country or whatever it may be. I mean, the truth about the country being revealed, that's what they really want to hide. And they're doing everything possible, no matter who it hurts, no matter who it takes something away from. So just remember this when something happens, because they may do something. They're saying they're going to vote soon and they're not going to do it with Republicans, so-called party line vote. They may even do it tomorrow. But here are the two things I want you to take away from that. First and foremost, it's not even close to enough money. So no matter what they pass, they still haven't done enough to help the struggling, working class, and oppressed people of this country, period, point blank. But secondly, it didn't have to take them this long to do it. And for no reason other than quote unquote optics, they were willing to let children go hungry. We're going to keep the movement moving on here, keep pushing the show forward. Just quickly before we go forward, if you haven't done it yet, if you're just joining us, hit that share button. Make sure that everyone who is following you is following us so they can see all the fantastic guests that we have coming up here. We have a number of people. We have Rosa Clemente, we have Larry Stafford, we have Abby Martin. So hit that share button. Stay with us if you're already with us. It's going to be a great show for the rest of the roughly hour we're going to be here. Just want to check in, make sure the team is good before we move on. Juan, in the booth, how you feeling?
I'm feeling good. I'm feeling good. I mean, as good as I could feel. 2020 is like constantly hitting 2020. Oh my gosh.
2021. I'm with you. Same thing.
Yeah, 2020 part 2, 2021. This storm the last couple days have been crazy. This is the first time I leave my house since Monday. So I was like in shock, like stepping out of my apartment. But you know what I feel, Eugene?
Please.
The last couple months of like 2020, people were like talking about how good 2021 was gonna be, how great it was gonna be. There was all these memes about how great it was. I feel like they're to blame. They're to blame for 2021 being bad.
It's the karma.
It's the karma.
The karma of 2021.
I'm not superstitious, but whenever you talk about how good something's gonna be, it's bound to be horrible.
I think there's a lot to that. I definitely think we're in a rough spot. I appreciate that. I'm always happy to put the karma on someone who's not myself when things are going wrong. Appreciate you as always, Juan.
Thanks.
We're going to keep moving forward here, and we are very, very honored to be joined as we continue the show here by Rosa Clemente, who's an organizer, an activist, a scholar, a journalist, the first Afro-Latina to run for vice president. I could go on and on and on, but I will not. Rosa, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Eugene. Where's my girl Abby, though? I need to be like...
No, she's coming on a little later. When I have all the heavy hitters, Rosa, I got to line them up.
Oh, okay. Abby, I love you. I miss you. I'm ready.
I appreciate you in many ways. I wanted to start here, Rosa, with, I think when we started out the show talking a little bit about what the Democrats are not doing in Congress. And whenever I see these moments, the one thing I often think about is how it's packaged to us as like a TV show. Like you're just watching it and you're hoping someone does the right thing. Like you're just a bystander. So the first question I wanted to ask you is, to everyone out here who may be watching this, who's looking at this and feeling like, what do? I'm disempowered. Do I have a role? Do I just have to wait for Biden? What do you say to those folks?
Well, I say first and foremost that we had to definitely do harm reduction. As I heard one time, Marissa Franco, who's an incredible sister and is the founder of Mi Gente, to put this electoral political process. I heard her speak and she said, well, at the end of the day, it's about harm reduction. And I really took that to heart, which is why for the first time ever, I endorsed someone on the Democratic Party, which was Julian Castro and then Bernie Sanders. I am angry. I am pissed off. I am figuring out what role I personally play in not having this movement really movement for human rights and Black and brown rights move in this country. And I've been processing that a lot myself, honestly. There is no reason why from day one people shouldn't have had money in their accounts or in other ways before Biden and Harris became president. And I think as every day passes since the inauguration, I definitely feel more and more the fear, the insecurity, the dilemma of this pandemic, because we know we're now in a space where this won't be the first one. This is the beginning of what many unfortunately, climate scientists have told us could be a wave of extinction. And it sucks to feel that way, right? Like, I'm actually in Albany, New York. So the brother who was like, I just went out, I haven't gone out. It's Albany, New York. It's gray, it's concrete, it's snow, it's depressing, and obviously I am happy that Biden and Harris are there. But at the end of the day, Eugene, maybe you should have been president, or you could have been my vice president, and we would be in a better place right now.
Well, I would agree with that 100%. I would definitely be on it. You never know. The future holds a lot of things. And maybe
lot,
that,
right?
I guess, and in a way, I think that kind of encompasses what I'm trying to give to people, which is that this is a moment where we have to trust each other, organize, come together, because we can change things, but it's like so much of what we get is designed to give us these disempowered feelings, and pushing back against that is so crucial.
And can I just, I want to say this, and it's physical and mental things that we are feeling now, almost a year into this, right? Like, I'm not wearing the eye patch because I want to be the Slick Rick of organizers, although I love Slick Rick. I'm wearing this eye patch because with digital eye strain, which is a very real thing, and then people like my husband who have to go out there 5 days a week because they're essential workers are like, oh, whatever, you're on a camera, you're mad lucky. Of course we are. But we don't understand the effects of this until it hits home. So one of my homegirls from the beginning was like, make sure you get some drops, get some blue light or yellow filters, turn down the brightness on your computer. And I took that all to heart, and I started taking these eye drops over the counter. And 4 days ago, I found out I had an infection in my cornea that was so bad that urgent care called the hospital to make sure that they would take me, because in Albany, New York, all those that are suffering from COVID get sent to this hospital. And, I was in the hospital. I'm around COVID patients. I'm also around people that have some mental health issues. And then finally, the ER doctor that saw me was like, what are the name of the eye drops you've been taking? I told her, and she goes, they have 2 chemicals, and one of them is menthol. So now not only do you have an eye infection, glaucoma is hereditary in my family. So anybody who has dealt with glaucoma in their family knows it's passed down. So I kind of always knew my eyesight may suffer. But there was a point in my house where I told my husband, I'm like, my eye hurts so much I can't even see. And when I process all this, at the end of the day, I have health insurance. I'm not going to pay a $5,000 bill. I can get an eye patch, and I can get eye drops, and also have my family around me that would support me financially or resource if I didn't have health insurance. But the crazy thing, Eugene, is that when my husband is out there every day working, and he's solid, class struggle solid, I'm like, yo, if anything, we need the health insurance. Before we even need your paycheck. You know what I'm saying? So he's also going out there every day. And I didn't realize this, and I'll end on this point on this. I didn't realize the mental weight that him and his colleagues have to go through 5 days a week when they have to spit in a tube and make sure that they don't have COVID. And I'm like, oh, what's the problem? Well, the problem is that mentally it weighs on you. So all this kind of to clash these last couple of days.
No, I think all of that is becoming so much more true as, we see the bungled rollout of the vaccines and people wondering how long it's going to take. And
horrible.
It is horrible. Not to make a hard pivot here, but I think it's a relevant issue because a lot of people are talking about, what's the program going to come in, what's it going to take to change the country. Obviously, many people who are hoping that there will be DC statehood. I'm also hoping there will be DC statehood. But a piece of that conversation is, well, if we're going to have DC statehood, we should have statehood for Puerto Rico. Obviously, those aren't the same issues. So, I was hoping you could just talk a little bit about that, because I think that the way they're twinned together is like, oh, this is the progressive thing for Black and Puerto Rican people if we make DC and Puerto Rico a state. and have just wiped out the rest of the conversation regarding the island.
Yeah, so as it regards Puerto Rico, we will never be a state, period. I don't care how many white liberals, neoliberals, people finding out that, oh my God, there's people in Puerto Rico, like 3 million, they might swing every vote. No, it's not happening. And post-Hurricane Maria is definitely not happening. Because what Hurricane Maria did to Puerto Rico is instilled a couple of things. One, mutual aid. That at the end of the day, we're the ones that save each other. Second, that we've been a colony of the United States since 1898. And third, that our people have been used for sterilization experiments, medical experiments, political prisoners held for over 25 years, political prisoners assassinated, as well as just Abuela and Abuelo in 1917 who wanted to fight for independence and was slaughtered in Ponce Massacre. So that's not happening. And I tell people as it regards Puerto Rico, follow the people in Puerto Rico, but also us of the diaspora. And and this might be something many people don't know, but, in the last 3 months, we've had these scandals with 2 white women who pass themselves off to be Puerto Rican. Mm-hmm. But the last one, and I say her name because let's say her name. Her name is Natasha Bannon, although I would be like, maybe Natasha Bannon. Maybe she's related to Steve Bannon. Who knows? What she did by faking to be a Puerto Rican for the last 15 years has now destabilized everything around struggle, arts, culture, and politics in Puerto Rico and in the diaspora. So we're dealing with that. And that might be small to what people think, but what I really believe, and I've been very public about it, is that this is actually what counterintelligence wants us to do, is have people come in and disrupt who we are and the politics that we fight for. So I respect people in Washington, D.C. who want statehood, and I respect those who don't. But I know in my heart that the next level for Puerto Rico is for us to be an independent island nation that could be the first island in the Caribbean to run on renewable sources and farming. And young people are already taking us there. Young people have upended 2 governors, and young people are now fighting against the femicide and transgender violence in Puerto Rico.
It really is amazing to see the uprisings there. And, I think it hasn't been brought to the mainland and the media the way it needs to be. I appreciate that so deeply. And, another issue I want to turn to here, another somber issue today, and I didn't even know today was the anniversary, so I feel so grateful that the universe worked out to have you here. This is the anniversary of the murder of Amadou Diallo by New York City police officers in 1999, February 4th, 1999. 41 shots. I mean, you were deeply involved in that struggle, Rosa. I mean, maybe just my first question is how are you reflecting on that moment here now in 2021?
So how I'm reflecting on that moment, as I do every year, is first, when Amadou Diallo was murdered, my father at that moment and to this day owns his business 2 blocks around from where Amadou Diallo was killed. And I, that time, was living back in Soundview. And that's a part of the Bronx in New York where you see the 6 train elevated. But also I was 8 blocks away from that. And the next day I talked to my dad, and everybody remember this was almost 20 years ago. He was like, something weird happened. We heard a lot of gunshots. And then because I have been part of the Malcolm X grassroots movement, had just joined and relocated back to the city, within a day we were all out there being led mostly by Richie Perez, one of our ancestors in the Young Lords and also the fight against this. Less than a year after that, I have moved back to Albany, New York, where I'm at now. And I was working as a congressional, one of the assemblyman aides. And the case got moved from the Bronx to Albany, New York. And I had called Richie Perez and I said, why am I here? I need to come back to the city. And he said, the case just got moved to Albany. Go organize. And we did. We started at the Capital Region for Justice for Amadou Diallo. Every day during the trial, there were many groups that came out. And then we were also there with the acquittal when we heard 28 times not guilty. So every time this comes, I not only recognize Amadou Diallo and his family, I really recognize that was a very, it was a moment where so many of us were like, part of our work has to be against police violence and the violence of the state. So I'm so happy that I was part of an organizing collective that could be like, yeah, y'all can move it to Albany, New York, but there's Black folks here too, and we're going to organize and we're going to support the family every day in front of that courthouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was 14 years old when that happened. I mean, the wallet just became so iconic.
Eugene, you 14.
Well, I'm going to be 35 this year.
Eugene!
I know.
Oh my God.
I don't look it though.
You already look it. I look it, but I'm like, you got a lot of wisdom, homie.
Well, I'm just trying to follow in the footsteps of Rosa Clemente and my great mentor, Dr. Jared Ball. Let me just ask you this before we close out, and just relating those two things, because the way that Amadou's name became so iconic for Black people. I mean, I'm in the South of what we were going through. Even though he was, an immigrant from West Africa, we all felt it. It felt very similar to me to the way George Floyd, the way that video impacted people, where you see a lot of bad things happen, but it was just something extra that just made you feel we must do something. And it almost seems, 20 years, roughly however many years later it is, I don't know, the spirit is coming back around. Like, that struggle is still not dead, and it's maybe in a new form, or maybe out on the streets around a different name, but it's still there. And I feel like that part is also important, that the resistance is still here.
Yeah, so when we look back at that time, we didn't have social media. We had to depend on mainstream media and a couple independent journalists. Here we are now where we don't have to depend on that. So for me, the struggle against police violence, state violence, has been a continuum, particularly within the African American, Puerto Rican, and other Latinx groups, So we're part of that struggle. It doesn't ever end. I definitely understand, though, what George Floyd meant viscerally, because at that moment, a lot of us also were at home. But for me, Ferguson taught us, Charlotte taught us, Baltimore taught us, Puerto Rico taught us, Nigeria is teaching us right now that the struggle against white supremacy, American imperialism, and capitalism is there. And just because we don't see everything visibly doesn't mean we're not doing the work, but also because we see everything visibly doesn't mean that everybody that looks like us and purports a radical, progressive Black and brown agenda doesn't always exist. So we're at a time right now where particularly young people have to weigh, like, am I just following someone because they're on a cover? Or am I following, or Black and brown, or I'm following someone because they have the politics of freedom? And I'm going to take up the mantle of my 16-year-old Black Puerto Rican daughter that has now been raised in a movement that understands that visibility is not power, that we don't need just representational politics, and that at the end of the day, as Daruba taught us, we got to pass it down. Mm-hmm. And I just want to plug something real quick, Eugene. Please. I'll shut up. February 12th, I hope that everybody is watching Judas and the Black Messiah. I've been very blessed and lucky to be part of this movie as a producer, and I welcome all critiques, and as Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. does as well. But I hope that we use next Friday as a moment to understand that our movements don't just die. They're actually infiltrated were incarcerated or assassinated. And I think that's the message for me that I want to carry with this movement, with the movie, that movements don't die. The system tries to stop us, but we're still here and we're not going anywhere.
That's right. Well, no, I appreciate it. We will definitely be watching. Rosa Clemente, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you, Eugene.
Have a great one now. And
You
just
too,
to
brother.
quickly note to people, next Friday on the 12th, the Freedom Side will be on Friday, not on Thursday. It'll be at 7, not at 8, but we are going to be doing a special episode of the Freedom Side. Well, it comes out in the middle of the day, so it's not after it premieres, but more or less after the premiere of Judas and the Black Messiah. We're going to have a range of fantastic folks who are going to be joining us, talking about the film, talking about the movie. So there's going to be a lot more coming out, but mark your calendars now. Next Friday, the Freedom Side, or next week, the Freedom Side will be on Friday. It's going to be 7 o'clock. It's going to be about Judas and the Black Messiah. It's going to be an amazing conversation about everything Fred Hampton related and about how his image is being portrayed in the 21st century. And quite frankly, what that means for all of us going forward, looking at his life and looking at his legacy. So again, you're here on the Freedom Side. We're going to keep moving forward. I am very happy to introduce, as we continue the show, Larry Stafford, who is the Executive Director of Progressive Maryland. Larry, what's up, man?
Hey, what's up, Eugene?
Man, it's good to see you. I have to say, I appreciate you joining us.
It's good seeing you too. And as a matter of fact, I feel like I'm learning stuff just watching the show. I didn't know your mentor was Dr. Jared Ball.
One of many, but absolutely. In some ways, a lot of why I probably do media now is because of Jared Ball. I've never even told him that, but when I moved to DC, people who are watching this, Larry and I are DC area guys, Super Funky Soul Power Hour used to be on PFW on Friday, and somebody hit me to it, and I just started listening to Jared and Dr. Haight, and then I met him at Sankofa. This is a very DC story.
Okay.
And I loved him as a guy, and he just kind of took me under his wing and has always been so supportive.
Yeah, he's sharp. Okay, great minds think alike. I'm trying to get mentored by him, so.
I'm going to put in a good word for you. We'll do a group email. But enough about me. Moving forward, so you guys have a lot going on in Progressive Maryland right now. Maryland is a state that a lot of people hear about, maybe don't know a lot about. I want to get into some of what y'all are doing, especially around criminal justice. But I just want to set the tone because I think a lot of people know Maryland as a, quote unquote blue state. They may be surprised to hear about some of these pieces. So I just want to, start a little bit with the status quo here. And I want to start directly with the thing that is, to me, one of the worst laws anywhere in the country, and that's the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. So if you could just explain what that is first, and then I want to get into what folks are doing to push back.
So it's basically the police get out of jail free card, if you want to break it down at the most simple level. But the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights currently is in statute in 16 states around the country, including Kentucky, as well as Minnesota, where we had the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor as well. And it's a policy that allows police to only be the only people that can investigate themselves is one aspect of it. They get to essentially choose the time of when they're going to be questioned or after an investigation or interrogated. And it gives police extra protections that keep them from getting fired. Like instead of going through the chief or some other kind of accountability, they go to trial boards in Maryland. Trial boards where other law enforcement get to review their actions. And this has been on the books in Maryland since the 1970s. Maryland was the first state to pass a law like this. And since then, like I said, it went to 16 other states where it's gotten in the way of accountability for law enforcement all across the country. So some of these high profile cases, a piece of the reason that there was an inability to hold police accountable is because of policies like the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights.
Yeah, I mean, it really is unbelievable. Some of the shootings I've seen. I mean, the 10 days you can't talk to them. I mean, it really is just it's biased. The good news, however, is that, I mean, and a lot has been happening, obviously, really since the Freddie Gray uprising, I know, in Maryland on these issues. But a lot of folks that I know have been talking about, this year being a key year on the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, around some of the marijuana pieces, that some movement could happen on criminal injustice issues, let's stay in the state of Maryland. So what's the state of play there?
So the state of play is that this movement across the country that we saw this summer has gotten at least some people to feel a little bit guilty about caping for police this entire time. In a majority Democratic legislature, we at Progressive Maryland, along with our allies in the Coalition for Justice and Police Accountability, we've been fighting for something like 5 or 6 years as a coalition to address things in the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. However, it wasn't until the uprisings over this past summer where we could actually get some form of a commitment for legislative leadership here in Maryland for Democrats to actually address this policy. And so that energy that swept the country on this, the uprising of the people, has forced people's hands in the legislature to actually take a look at this policy. And so the other side to this as well, so we have a variety of approaches we're taking to address police accountability, including transparency of records, removing police from our schools where they're in here brutalizing and arresting young folks for minor infraction that they could easily be disciplined or put into some type of restorative practice inside the school system. So, and then on the other side of it, we're also looking to address the failed war on drugs. And you mentioned marijuana legalization, but on that front, and we could talk about it probably more later, we have to make sure that if we legalize marijuana, that the community actually reaps the benefits. The communities that have been targeted by the war on drugs actually reap the benefits, because we got to remember the connection between the war on drugs and over policing here. Like, if we want to address police brutality and police murder, frankly, we have to address the war on drugs hand in hand with it.
No, I think that's 100% true, and I mean, let's talk about it now, because I think that's a crucial issue. I mean, it's certainly one that's hanging over New York and a few other states. This equity piece. I mean, what are some of the things that you think can be put in place that can address this? Because I feel like in so many states they say, "Oh, we're going to deal with it," and then 2 years later, you see everyone who's got a license to grow and sell is white.
Exactly. Like places like Colorado have not been the example of what should be done around marijuana legalization. And in fact, legalization is in vogue right now. You've got state after state looking to pass legalization, and largely because of the budget constraints that states are facing across the country due to the COVID pandemic and other reasons as well. They're looking for new kinds of industries to be able to tax and regulate. Marijuana is just an opportunity in that sense. However, what we're facing here in Maryland is that there is now this appetite to legalize marijuana. Yet just today in Maryland Matters, this white senator from Montgomery County, I'm sure you know Montgomery County, wealthy Montgomery County, he puts forward his version of marijuana legalization that does not do nearly enough to repair the harms from the war on drugs in terms of reparations for our communities, and a mechanism in which we can actually have some semblance of democratic accountability or control of these reparations, nor does it allow for enough licenses so that people of color who've been shut out from the industry in other places can actually participate in the formerly illegal market. And he's getting praised by Democrats' leadership. And also in this article, they praise him while a young black legislator in the House has a bill that he's actually worked on with the community, with us, as well as labor, as well as other racial justice organizations. His bill does not get the same highlight because the industry is crafting the Senate version of this bill. Big Weed, which reminds me of a Friday character. It just gives me that ring to it. But Big Weed is crafting the legislation for Senator Brian Feldman. And so he's getting a lot of attention for it. But his bill has almost nothing to do with real racial justice.
Gene.
Yeah, I hear you before. The booth here, I think Juan in the booth may want to ask a question. Is that true, Juan?
Yeah.
Yeah, jump in.
What's up?
So we have a question from, hey, Larry. We have a question from YouTube. Punkadelic2 asks, do you think the decriminalization of all drugs will be done by more states following the legislation in Oregon this year?
I hope so. Look, I don't know what more states are going to do, but in Maryland, that's something we're supporting as well. In fact, unfortunately, because of the limitations in the legislature during the pandemic, our sponsor, who was putting forward decriminalization legislation this session, actually withdrew the bill. But we want to come back even harder next year, and I think that there will be an appetite for this. At least I have big hopes that there will be, because, like I said, we gotta end the war on drugs. That goes hand in hand with police accountability, because the reason that the police, or why they justify the police being so militarized and so numerously spread out throughout our communities, is because of this war on drugs that's failed and has been like nothing close to a success.
I think that's 100% true. One thing that I'm curious too, just in terms of the feeling and maybe the debate, is has the gun trace task force scandal, and I got a monster, great new book that's out about this issue. These officers, they're selling drugs, they're robbing people, they're doing this in Baltimore City, I think involving some state police. Has this scandal and maybe the veil being ripped off, well, I don't know if it needed to be ripped off, for the people who maybe still were confused, the veil being ripped off about the reality of some of this war on drugs. Have you seen that make an impact on how people are viewing this?
Yeah, and regular people like you and me, it definitely has made an impact. And I've seen legislators in and around Baltimore City who definitely were familiar with the story around this, see the police in an entirely new light, that many of our communities have already seen the police for what they've been doing in Baltimore City for a very long time. However, that issue has been known, the case with the gun trace task force, it's been known for a very long time, yet you still have some elected so-called representatives that want to protect the police at every chance that they get. So there's a bit of a philosophical difference when it comes to certain representatives. However, I would say the biggest difference that got made, and I still haven't figured out exactly what it was about the uprisings around the death of George Floyd, that definitely moved the needle tremendously. But like you're saying, this has been going on for a very long time. And the gun trace task force, if people don't know about that, please look that up. Baltimore City Gun Trace Task Force. That case is absolutely wild. It would be a movie that I wouldn't even want to see, as a matter of fact, but it's theatrical in terms of the level of corruption and that went on inside the Baltimore City Police Department.
Yeah, it's like Training Day when you look into it. Is worse in
a
lot of ways.
Multiple Denzel Washingtons just running around shaking people down, doing everything wrong.
I'm telling you. Let me ask you this final question. You sort of alluded to it, and I think it's important for people who are watching around the country just in terms of our moment. You know, Maryland is a state with a Democratic supermajority. Y'all are still organizing, still pushing. Talking about the importance of grassroots organizing, even in a moment where it seems like you have a lot of people who are at least claiming they want to address your issues.
Yeah, so grassroots organizing is incredibly important still because, like I was saying at the time when like the uprising was at its peak, everyone was in the streets, tearing things up and coming out for justice. It was, we've seen these ebbs and flows in our movement before where people are hurt, people are outraged and crying out for justice in a moment, and then inevitably like that energy is gonna quell. It has its peak and then it has a valley. What organizing is about is keeping that same energy and keeping people engaged and organized. It's great to have energy and momentum and thousands of people in the streets, but that at the end of the day has to be sustained within a structure because to give you an example, when we were fighting for police accountability back in, 2016, 2015, just about right after the death of Freddie Gray, it was at a time when some of that energy had begun to trickle off when the legislative session began. But the FOP, they don't operate based off of their feelings in any given day or whether or not something is on a constant news cycle. They show up organized every time it comes to protecting their rights and privileges to be able to abuse us. They're highly organized, highly functional and effective. When they want to get officers out there to testify, when they want to intimidate folks in the hallways of Annapolis, walking around and daring people to change policies that affect them, they're very effective. And so we have to be just as organized, just as consistent if we want to see these changes in the long term. And yeah, it's great to have a mass movement. And, I've been out there like everybody else at protests across the country, but we have to keep this sustainable. We have to keep that energy going.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. Well, Larry, I appreciate you and I appreciate everything you're doing to keep the energy going there at Progressive Maryland. Again, that was Larry Stafford, Executive Director of Progressive Maryland. Thanks so much for joining us, man.
All right, peace.
Right on, peace. Have a good one now. We're going to keep moving forward. We got more guests here, so you still can hit that share button and let folks who are following you follow us. We want to keep moving forward. Keep moving forward, though. I'm struggling. We're getting to the end here, y'all. Juan, I'm struggling. I hear you laughing back there. I'm doing the best I can. We got a great team here. Juan in the booth, Will, Kay, Marissa, everyone who's working on this, Marcus who does the sounds, Rachel. A fantastic team. So just shout out to the whole Breakthrough News team who puts this show together and makes it possible. We want to bring on journalist and host of the Empire Files, Abby Martin, to the show here next. Abby, thank you so much for joining us on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much for having me, Eugene, and props to the whole team. Love the show.
Well, I'll tell you, the pleasure is all ours. We're all big fans of the Empire Files here as well, empirefiles.tv for those of you in listener land. I want to start here, Abby, sort of unexpectedly in this afternoon, the Biden administration, I don't know what they announced, but they allegedly announced that they were going to leave the war in Yemen and sometime in the future. Should we be excited about this? Is this portending anything good? Is it window dressing? How are you viewing this?
I think it's a great start. This is something that Biden was promising during his campaign. This is one of the few changes that we were expecting to happen under his tenure, and he immediately fulfilled at least temporarily those weapon shipments to the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which I think is a huge move. And, everyone gave Trump credit for supposedly being anti-war when we can't forget that he vetoed that bill that tried to end those U.S. weapon shipments. So this is really just aiding and abetting genocide. I mean, it's sad that it had to get to this point where tens of millions of people are starving to death in Yemen. There is a small caveat that I heard Blinken talking about, about potentially sanctioning the Houthi rebels on the ground. He claims that the Houthis control 80% of Yemeni territory. I don't know how true that is, but so there is something there to be said about what exactly will that mean moving forward with humanitarian assistance that they so desperately need. And also, of course, this doesn't deter the support, the staunch support for Saudi Arabia in general. So this has already been reiterated by Anthony Blinken, saying, of course, we need Saudi Arabia to carry out counterterrorism measures in the region. So this is just an end to the offensive, logistical, tactical support, and of course the weapons, because it was much more than weapons that the U.S. was doing to help kill Yemenis. And also Blinken reiterated the fact that we are going to also help Riyadh with defense against Houthi attacks on the border.
Well, I think those are very important caveats, certainly ones that are good for the military contractors with that defense there. I mean, I wonder what you're making of Blinken so far. I mean, it almost feels, well, I don't want to say too much editorializing, but it just seems that, I don't know, new neocon warmonger the same as the old one.
I mean, this is, like you said, window dressing. This is your classic neoliberal interventionist, right? So to mask all the language and humanitarianism, but really when you unmask who he is, he's just the same old, good old boy that essentially Mike Pompeo was, just with more gentle language and maybe not the religious zealotry, but who knows? So yeah, I mean, Blinken is so far a complete and total disaster. I mean, what I think people need to remember is that he was actually Biden's closest foreign policy advisor when Biden championed the invasion of Iraq. So this is something that is such a horrible legacy for anyone. They have to completely denounce their support for Iraq at this point. And the fact that he was in Biden's ear when Biden was leading the charge for the Democratic support, I think is something that really needs to be said about who Blinken is at his core, not to mention the hardline support for the war in Libya against Muammar Gaddafi. And also he says that the US didn't go far enough in Syria. He is an advocate of regime change there. So we could see some ugly maneuvering in Syria as well. And we also have to look at his shadowy past at West Exec Advisors. This is kind of a modeling off the Kissinger and Associates group that literally claimed to help defense corporations market their products to the Pentagon. So, I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to see a lot of unification with the most imperialist warmongers on the Republican side when it comes to Latin America, China, and the Middle East, unfortunately.
I think that's actually a crucially important point, because I think in the era of Trump, in many ways it was lost how much continuity there is in foreign policy on both sides. And I just wonder if this is maybe one of the dangers of the Democrats as the front man, if you will, is that since they bring a little more civility, a little more, just a less odious je ne sais quoi to it, that it can lull people to sleep a little bit about how bad it really is.
This is the big problem, right, with the Democratic Party is, there's a lot of problems with the Democratic Party, but in the most egregious cases, they cheered on Trump's atrocities and war crimes all across the world when Trump was president for 4 years. And this is the thing that really irks me, is that Trump exacerbated drone strikes 300%. Trump added hundreds of genocidal sanctions on countries all around the world, bringing people to the brink of starvation in many countries, just absolutely horrific, sadistic stuff there, Eugene. And what I find bizarre is that the Biden administration has not talked about any of these things. They've not talked about reining any of these policies back. And so what they're doing is re-inheriting, because we're talking about the Obama administration really overseeing that killer drone empire, Trump expanding it to record levels and making it way less accountable. And now you have Biden's team coming in, overseeing a less accountable, widely expansive drone empire. All of these sanctions, we already know when it comes to Iran, they're stripping the negotiations and saying, no, you need to capitulate to our demands and these benchmarks that we're not going to drop any of the sanctions. Trump put 800 plus sanctions on Iran. I mean, that is absolutely insane. So Blinken and all of Biden's foreign policy advisors are not talking about any of these things. And we even see Jen Psaki talking about how excited she is about overseeing the Space Force. I mean, this is not just a joke. I know it's like a show on TV and it's just like some big comical thing about Trump. But really, when you look at what Space Force is, not only is it a boon to the military industrial complex, but it also is violating several treaties and starting a new arms war.
I think that's an extraordinary point because it is such a joke and a sideshow and the flag looking like Star Trek. But I mean, it seems like one of many things, the Space Force, the new Cold War, the rehash of it just feels, I mean, I almost feel weird saying it because people say, oh, well, that seems so crazy. Why would you say that? But it feels like the danger of nuclear war is so deeply rooted in these institutions, but it can so easily be turned into a joke. But I mean, it seems like the consequences of this are potentially catastrophic as can be.
Absolutely, which is why it's also very problematic that Biden is having a more hostile front toward Russia. I mean, this is a nuclear armed country. They have the second largest arsenal of nuclear weapons in the world. And instead of rehabilitating the relationship, because Trump certainly wasn't good on Russia, even though everyone painted him as a Putin puppet, Biden is taking this aggressive stance and Blinken is taking this aggressive stance. And it's just absolutely outrageous. We need to be talking to these leaders. We need to be talking about scaling down these absurd arsenals of nuclear weapons and essentially, at the end of the day, obliterating them all, because we're never going to really be safe with all of these nukes on the planet, Eugene. But one thing you mentioned earlier was the bipartisan kind of uniformity when it comes to the foreign policy establishment approach. And I can't think of a better example than Venezuela. It's absolutely disgusting and reprehensible what Biden is doing. Not only did he cater to like the right-wing, Venezuelans his entire campaign, but he immediately, as one of his first acts, recognized Juan Guaido. This guy isn't even a legislator in Venezuela anymore. Like, who is this person? And also Blinken signaling to Marco Rubio, the most abhorrent of all figures in Venezuela, who actually tweeted a open lynch threat against Maduro during the coup attempt, akin to the lynching of Muammar Gaddafi. And his account was actually fine, and it's still active on Twitter. But Blinken signaled to him and just said, I can't wait to work with you on Venezuela. So we're going to have to really build the pressure there to prevent another immediate coup attempt under Biden.
I mean, it really is through the looking glass. I saw a photo of Guaido. I think it was from this weekend of him he was talking about he was having a press conference, I guess, about the vaccines. And he's just like at a completely random table in the middle of the street with like 12 people. And he's like, I actually can't do anything about vaccines. And I just thought, what world are we living in that you could pretend that this guy is the president? I mean, it's the worst of imperial hubris, I feel like. And I think you made the point very well, the bipartisan nature, the Marco Rubios. It's this sense of, since I can do anything, I will do anything.
Absolutely. And you saw Blinken actually in an interview with Andrea Mitchell just recently basically say just that. I mean, we are the arbiters of human rights and democracy, and Trump eroded that, and we need to re-implement that. And that's why he was most worried, it seemed, about the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, because it, made the image of America falter around the world, and he really wants to reassert that so they can get back to business.
I'm glad you brought up Iran, which raises another issue, which is Israel. Are you expecting any change on that front?
Well, Biden infamously said he didn't want to move the embassy back, so he is going to stay with that policy that was an absolutely disastrous policy that we saw prompt the entire Great March of Return. Of course, that was, facilitated our movie, Gaza Fights for Freedom. Tens of thousands of Palestinians were unarmed, marching to the partition fence that separates them from their ancestral lands, and they were mowed down by Israeli snipers. A lot of them were wounded, but a lot of them were also killed extrajudicially. This was something that was all sparked by the moving of the embassy. Now, of course, Biden is saying he doesn't want to recognize anything else. The only thing that I think we will see a difference on Palestine is potentially refunding the UNRWA aid that Trump ripped out under refugees. That was absolutely devastating to people who needed immediate access to medical care and other types of aid. And so hopefully Biden will reinstate that. That is very, very urgently needed for the millions of refugees in Gaza and elsewhere. But as far as anything else, no. I mean, Biden has bragged for years about being a staunch Zionist. He has a 100% rating from AIPAC. We're not going to see anything else change on that front.
Well, I'm certainly glad you mentioned the fantastic documentary, Gaza Fights for Freedom, and everything you guys do at Empire Files is fantastic. I hope people check it out. But it reminds me of something else, and something I appreciate about what you all do is that, I mean, obviously we're in a battle of a lot of different things, and we have to push and we have to make pressure, but it feels like a lot of what we're in right now is almost information warfare. Like, there's a lot of information out there, but figuring out how to bring it all together and what that coherent critique is so difficult that, I don't know, it seems to me maybe more now than even in the Trump era, critical media, especially on issues related to imperialism, is well, I don't know, I guess I already said it's crucial, but it's crucial.
This is why Breakthrough News is so crucial, and people really need to spread the word because it's one of the best alternative media platforms out there. And in terms of how the media will shift their tone with Biden, I think we're going to see exactly what we saw during the lead up to the election, Eugene. I mean, during his entire primary campaign, they were totally uncritical. There was no coverage of him being a serial plagiarist or pathological liar or, rape allegations against him. It was, of course, all centered. The ire was all centered on Bernie Sanders, and we saw how that turned out. So we're going to see the same exact tone be taken during Biden's entire administration. I mean, let's face it. Trump tapped into this kind of growing distrust of the corporate media, calling everything that wasn't sycophantic coverage of him fake news. And I think that what that did ultimately was undermine and delegitimize the corporate media to the extent that they were just obsessed with him because they consider themselves, of course, the end-all, be-all, truth tellers, right? Like, and everything kind of goes back to these corporate media narratives, whether you're looking at, the algorithms changing or how Wikipedia is structured, all of these things. So they were absolutely insulted and devastated at that. But that wasn't the reason why they obsessively covered Trump. It was because he was a boon for their advertising structure and for their ratings. They saw ratings like none other when Trump was president. So, of course, they couldn't get out of their own way with constantly covering every single thing he did, even though we saw how that turned out. He was able to basically tap into their faults and spread so much right-wing propaganda that you have half of the country just not believing in COVID, protesting the vaccine. We just saw a huge protest in LA against the vaccination center. This is the effect of Trumpism, and also not just his right-wing media sphere, but the corporate media in general, covering him nonstop, these press conferences, the talking points, the tweets, and not having any sort of retrospective, like no accountability of how we got Trump, So now it's just this huge sigh of relief. Well, now it's back to sanity and civility because the corporate media is an arm of the empire. They're an arm of the Pentagon. And all they want is to basically reassure people that everything's back to normal now. Trump is out. They're desperate for this return to normalcy because Trump threw the array, and that's really what shook the establishment to its core the most. But Eugene, we saw the corporate media covered Trump when it came to his war crimes. They were near tears. Brian Williams, Fareed Zakaria saying this is when Trump became president. So we're going to go back to the same sort of imperialist warmongering, but again, through the lens of humanitarianism, just the way they like it.
Yes, the good old bait and switch. Look over here while we do this over there. I mean, it really can be just hard to even imbibe the scale of the lies that are being told. I think that makes it harder to grasp onto because it is so big. And I just wonder on that basis, mentioning algorithms too, if you're concerned about well, I'll put this another way. I saw Biden also announce this week a reality czar that's designed to combat disinformation, another air quotes there, online. But it seems to me that when you hear that, it's really like, well, how do we undermine narratives on issues we don't like? I mean, it seems, Twitter, Facebook, there's a lot of things they're doing, but that to me seems very dangerous, this push that well, there's all this disinformation, not that there isn't, but they're rarely talking about the real disinformation. They seem to be mainly talking about, Russia, China, Iran, whatever.
Yeah, that's what we've seen. Ever since Trump won, they couldn't blame the system. They couldn't blame neoliberalism. They couldn't blame themselves. So they had to point to fake news, right? In general, the Pizzagate phenomenon, all of these things that erupted from the WikiLeaks files on Podesta. And that led to this kind of fallout from Russiagate in general that I was actually in part a victim of, where the DNI report came out, this joint report that basically blamed Russia Today and a bunch of other nonsense for giving us Trump and aiding and abetting sowing radical discontent and discord among the American public. And it pointed from everything from Black Lives Matter activists to Occupy Wall Street people to it was so absurd. But what it resulted in, Eugene, was Google changing the algorithm and making websites like Counterpunch, like World Socialist website, all these websites that ran counter to the corporate media narrative about capitalism and empire were essentially backpaged into oblivion, where you can't even find these websites anymore unless you are looking specifically for them. If you're doing research on an issue, you get corporate media for the first 5 pages. It is really, really sad because a lot of people don't even realize that this happened. And like you mentioned, social media giants have curated our reality for the last couple of years, and it's becoming more and more insulated, where now you have something like the Alliance for Securing Democracy, who actually Jake Sullivan, one of Biden's another foreign policy team, is actually on the think tank board of, along with other very sinister officials, that also has this black box algorithm that determines who is and who is not a Russian bot and essentially just scrapes their account. So while there is every news story about purging right-wing accounts or QAnon or Trump himself, who has now become the martyr and somehow this breaking point of the slippery slope of the internet of tech censorship, this has been going on for years against leftists, against communists, against government officials in other countries, Chavistas, Iranian officials. I mean, this has been happening for so long that it's hard to find sympathy for Trump specifically when leftists have really been the ultimate targets for censorship. And unfortunately, it's not going to stop because we know that is ultimately the target and the goal of these tech giants working in concert with the government.
I remember that DNI report. They isolated, among other things, the third-party debate that you hosted that I was honored to be a part of. And it's just so funny that people say it's sinister. That was 8 years ago. Still to this day, I get so many positive comments about that. People are like, oh, I saw you in that thing, in that debate. That was great. And it's they're treating it as if this is Russian infiltration. But, for average people, it felt so good to have a libertarian, an anarchist, and a communist, which all told represents millions of people in this country, actually be able to talk and decide. But speaking about the people, I think we got one quick question from YouTube here. Juan.
Hey. So there's a question. I saw Lenin Moreno went to D.C. the other day to consult with the U.S. government. What is Biden's administration's planning in Ecuador?
That's a really good question. I know that there is an election coming up where I think the socialist is at, poised to win, which would be huge because we know Lenin Moreno completely sold out Julian Assange and the entire country, essentially, where Korea, I think, still has an arrest warrant out for him if he returns to the country that he oversaw so many advances in. So it's a really good point. I think that to instruct what Biden will do, we can just look at his policy toward Latin America in general. And unfortunately, it's very anti-communist. And I fear that he is not going to be good at all and potentially stage some sort of coup attempt or undermine the pending election of this socialist figure in Ecuador.
I have the exact same fear. I've heard some chatter on the social networks, as they say in Latin America. There's a fear that they may cancel the election, which is February 7th. Andres Arroz, who is fantastic. We had the opportunity to interview him last year during the quarantine on Breakthrough News about something totally different, about IMF special drawing rights, which he had a great thing about. But if you go back and check it out, you can see great person, great humanity. I think there's a very good chance he could win. But yeah, I think you're 100% right, Abby. We have to be concerned. Before I let you get out of here, just real quickly, where can people find and support the work that y'all are doing on the Empire Files?
Check out YouTube while we're still up before we get taken down, youtube.com/empirefiles, theempirefiles.tv, GazaFightsForFreedom.com, and you can follow me on Twitter at Abby Martin. Thank you so much, Eugene and the team at Breakthrough. Can't wait to join you guys again.
Hey, thank you so much, Abby. I really appreciate it. Everybody check out Empire Files. Great work. Everything they do, I can highly recommend it. So thank you again. All right, well, that is going to do it for us here today on the Freedom Side. But before we go, I just want to let you know that everything that we do here is brought to you by you. We're crowdfunded. We need your help. We want you to be a part of our team, too. If you go to patreon.com/breakthrough news, that's patreon.com/breakthrough news. You can become a patron. There's all sorts of good things. We've got more good things, including more exclusive content coming to you. So there's quite a bit to be excited about in addition to what you can already get. But the more you do, the more you give, the more that we can do. I just also, of course, want to mention here, It's Not You, It's Capitalism, which is our new show recently released as a podcast here on Breakthrough News. Check out at BT Newsroom, our social media. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock, you'll be able to find the link to be able to listen to that. It's Not You, It's Capitalism. And don't forget, next week, the Freedom Side will not be on Thursday. It will be on Friday. It will not be at 8. It will be at 7. And we will be having a special edition of the Freedom Side that will be discussing Judas and the Black Messiah. That's the new movie that's coming out, more or less about Fred Hampton and Scott Lakeith Stanfield, a number of other people. We're going to have a great panel. We're going to talk about everything there is to say, good, bad, or indifferent. So next Friday, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place, same channel, at BT Newsroom across all of your social networks, also on YouTube, Breakthrough News. We will be bringing you this special, Judas and the Black Messiah, February 12th. Don't forget, but that will do it for us here today on the Freedom Side.